In the opening scene from Ridley Scott's 1982 film Blade Runner, we find ourselves flying over a nightmare Los Angeles that languishes under a perpetual midnight. Our view of the sprawl smash cuts between hyper close-ups of an unblinking eye reflecting titanic gas flares that scrape the polluted sky. Our view glides up the side of a colossal pyramid looming over all of the other skyscrapers, its sides glittering with thousands of windows. We close in on one of those windows, revealing a bleak, gray interior cut by spinning ceiling fans. We jump to the other side of the wall, where a lone male figure, backlit against the window, stands in a smoke-filled cubicle among a long line of other, empty cubicles. The room is full of smoke, and the man lights a cigarette. Perhaps he's been here for a while already. A disembodied female voice announces, "Next subject, Kowalski, Leon." An oafish child enters. He appears bewildered. The smoking man sits and begins activating a mechanical device that extends an arm, tipped with a threatening red light that looks a lot like a targeting reticle. Leon stares at the device, uncertain what to do. Without looking up, the man says, "Sit down," gesturing toward the egregiously tall leather executive chair across the table from him, then aligns the reticle with Leon's eye. Leon slumps into the chair, looks around, and says he gets nervous when he takes tests. The word Tyrell emblazons the back of the chair and hovers over Leon's head. The machine on the table begins breathing. Leon looks away from it and rambles. "I already had an IQ test this year. I don't think I've ever had one of these." The smoking man interrupts him. "Reaction time is a factor in this, so please pay attention. Now, answer as quickly as you can." We barely hear Leon mutter, "Sure," before the smoking man rattles off an address, 1187 Unterwasser. Leon immediately responds, "That's the hotel." The smoking man looks up at Leon for the first time and snaps, "What?" Leon, still slumping with his hands in his lap, tells him it's where he lives, and asks if this is part of the test. The man explains that it's just warming him up, and Leon tells him that his hotel isn't fancy or anything. The smoking man ignores him, flips the page on a booklet, and launches into a story. You're in a desert, walking along in the sand, when all of a sudden, Leon asks, "Is this the test now?" The man looks annoyed. "Yes. You're in a desert, walking along in the sand, when all of a sudden you look down." Leon asks, "What one?" The man leans forward, squinting. "What?" Leon clarifies, "What desert?" "It doesn't make any difference what desert." The man dismisses Leon's question. "It's completely hypothetical." "But," Leon asks, clearly not understanding what hypothetical means, "how come I'd be there?" "Maybe you're fed up," the man shakes his head. "Maybe you want to be by yourself. Who knows?" He continues with the story. "You look down, and you see a tortoise, Leon. It's crawling towards you." Leon sits up a little. "Tortoise? What's that?" The man takes a long drag off his cigarette and sighs. "Know what a turtle is?" Leon nods, and the man says, "Same thing." Leon says he's never seen a turtle, and the man glares at him. But Leon says he understands what he means. The man continues, "You reach down, you flip the tortoise over on its back, Leon." Rather than asking why he'd do that, Leon asks, "Do you make up these questions, or do they write them down for you?" The smoking man ignores the question and leans forward, his voice more aggressive. The tortoise lays on its back, its belly baking in the hot sun, beating its legs, trying to turn itself over. Leon's eyes widen with horror, and he begins to quiver. "But it can't, not without your help." "But you're not helping," Leon shouts. "What do you mean I'm not helping?" "I mean," says the smoking man, "you're not helping." He smirks, seemingly delighted with Leon's discomfort. "Why is that, Leon?" Leon blinks and looks away. The smoking man lets the question hang in the air as Leon squirms in his chair. Finally, the man smiles and says, "They're just questions, Leon." He leans back in his seat, looking pleased, and takes a long drag off his cigarette. "In answer to your query, they're written down for me. It's a test, designed to provoke an emotional response." Leon lowers his chin, still quivering slightly. The man stubs out his cigarette. "Shall we continue?" Leon nods, slumping down in his seat again. Welcome back to the Nerd Manual, guys. I hope you'll pardon the liberties I've taken with this scene from Blade Runner, but in this program, we're participating in Nando V Movies' collaborative project, One Villainous Scene, where we look at the antagonist's actions in a pivotal scene from the big or possibly small screen. I don't usually do video essays, but I gave a lot of thought to this, considering hot takes on everything from Buffy the Vampire Slayer's neo-Wagnerian tropes to Willy Wonka's diabolical scheming. But I decided to dive into the seminal cyber-noir feature Blade Runner. If you've already seen this flawed gem, you're probably wondering how I've managed to get the interrogation scene completely wrong, but indulge me for a few minutes, and I'll explain why I've gone a bit sideways with the film's opening. For those of you who haven't watched Blade Runner, maybe you should take a break and go watch it before this video. You know, so I don't spoil your experience. Go ahead, I'll be here when you get done. Oh, be aware, this film is a slow burn. It's a successor to the hard-boiled film noir detective movies of the 1950s where the action takes a long time to reach a boiling point, but you'll feast on the atmosphere as things heat up. So first off, let me correct a few things about this opening scene. The smoking man is Holden, a Blade Runner, a type of policeman specializing in tracking down synthetic humans called replicants. Leon is not technically a child, he's a fully grown male, who Holden is interrogating with a Voight-Comp machine to determine if he is a replicant who infiltrated the Tyrell Corporation, headquartered in that giant pyramid we saw in the opening sequence. For those of us familiar with Blade Runner, we already know going in that Leon is a replicant and Holden is a cop, so we're predisposed to see one as the bad guy and the other as the good guy. But I'd like to reframe this scene in a couple of different ways to see if we've actually got it right. First, let's watch this scene as if we've never seen the movie before. Starting out, it's ambiguous what's going on and who's the antagonist. Holden's this shadowy figure in a smoke-filled cube who starts grilling this guy Leon with no explanation as to why. He's dismissive, then aggressive toward him. Is Holden corporate security? Is he a psychiatrist? Is he maybe a lawyer trying to strong-arm Leon into breaking a union? We don't even find out that Holden's a cop until several scenes later. Leon, on the other hand, is clearly not the fastest thinker. The female voice announces that he works in waste disposal, so we know he's not an executive. He seems to want to be helpful by promptly responding to Holden's offhanded mention of the hotel address. He also has trouble grasping the meaning of things that aren't concrete. For example, when Holden tells him the desert is hypothetical, and Leon continues to ask why he's there. All indications point to him being intellectually disabled, but Holden seems to enjoy intimidating him. Even the cinematic language gives mixed signals about who is the antagonist at this table. Holden wears a dark suit. He's backlit when we first see him. He's wreathed in smoke. His body language is aggressive as he leans forward to press his advantage over Leon. Leon, on the other hand, wears a white jumpsuit, and his body language is submissive, particularly as he leans as far back in his chair as possible from Holden. Oh, I did leave out the part at the end of this scene where Leon shoots Holden with the gun he's been holding under the table, blowing him through the cubicle wall. So on first watch, this is a real jolt. The tension between the two men ratchets tighter and tighter until Holden casually smiles and tells Leon that the questions are written for him. This gives us space for a breath. We know something critical is coming, but will it be an accusation, a confession? It's a shock when the gun goes off because we haven't been given a clear picture of what's happening or even who the bad guy is in this film. But now we know. Or do we? I mean, Holden isn't the movie's protagonist, and Leon isn't even the main antagonist. It's not until the next scene that we meet Deckard, a retired Blade Runner who is tasked with hunting down the group of replicants, and from there the action mainly follows him through the rest of the plot. However, we don't meet Roy, the leader of the replicants, until 25 minutes into the movie. Introducing characters late isn't unusual in films, but it is one of the many examples of how Blade Runner isn't a conventional movie. And I'm not just talking about when we're shown our good guy or bad guy. There's a significance to this timing that isn't immediately evident on the first or possibly several subsequent viewings. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me reframe the scene between Holden and Leon again, in the context of some information we discover a little later in the movie. After Gaff takes Deckard to see Bryant, who strong-arms Deckard into agreeing to find the replicants, we're given a briefing on the situation. A group of 6 replicants hijacked a shuttle, crashed it on Earth, and tried to enter the Tyrell facility. 2 replicants were killed in the attempt, and Bryant shows Deckard the dossiers of the remaining 4. There's Roy, a combat model, Zora, trained for an off-world assassination squad, Pris, a pleasure model designed for military clubs, and Leon, who we've met already. He's a munitions loader. Bryant notes that the replicants were designed to copy human beings in every way except their emotions. However, the designers thought that after a few years they might develop their own, things such as hate, love, fear, and anger. So they designed them with a 4-year lifespan to prevent this from happening. I think this is a crucial piece of information to better understanding Blade Runner, and it's why I portrayed Leon as a child at the start of this essay. Replicants, by design, can never be more than 4 years old. Let that sink in. If replicants were human beings, they would all be children. As Bryant shows Deckard the data sheets on each replicant, we can see their incept dates, the equivalent of human birthdays. 3 of the replicants were activated in 2016, Roy in January, Pris in February, and Zora in June. So each of them is a little over 3 years old, and rapidly approaching their shutdown dates. Leon was activated in April 2017, so he's only a little over 2 years old. It may be unfair to equate the age of a replicant to the age of a human. It's clear that the replicants have bodies that are fully adult, they can move and talk like adults, and they have enough skills to perform complicated tasks. This last point is worth considering a bit more carefully. While Deckard is learning about the 4 replicants he's been tasked with finding, we can see on their dossiers that each has a function. Not a job, a function. Roy's is combat for the colonization defense program. Pris's is military leisure, which Bryant refers to as pleasure. Zora's profile notes that she was retrained for political homicide when she was just over a year old. Leon's function is combat, but also loading nuclear fissile weapons. So the replicants do have more skills than your typical 3-year-old human, but they were trained, in some cases retrained, to do particularly unsavory jobs, unlike your typical 3-year-old human. We don't have any information on what the training involves or how long it takes, and it may even be some sort of in vitro process, but regardless of the skill sets impressed upon them, their life experiences are still as limited as those in a human child of the same age. Perhaps it's more fair to think of replicants as children jammed into adult bodies and trained like guard dogs, or maybe workhorses. On a related note, Leon's profile marks his mental level as C, compared with Roy's A or Pris and Zora's B, which leads me to think of Leon as a child with intellectual functioning disabilities and possibly adaptive behavior disabilities. He was dumped into a menial labor position rather than given treatment and rehabilitation, an idea that's supported by the way he responds to Holden's questions. So here's Leon, a 2-year-old boy with demonstrated social and likely practical disabilities who has spent his entire life loading nuclear materials and possibly killing people at the whim of his owners. Imagine the things he would feel while a police officer interrogates him, asking bizarre questions about strange animals in the desert, accusing him of deliberately hurting a creature he didn't even know existed. The humans in Blade Runner repeatedly talk about replicants having no emotions, but it's clear from Leon's body language that he's terrified. It's not difficult to see that Leon doesn't choose to shoot Holden just because he's a cop. If he wanted to do that, he could have shot him when he first walked in the room. No, he holds out as long as he can, but Holden pushes him to a breaking point. Leon has been freed from slavery and given hope for a new life, only to end up across the table from this abusive, intimidating man who seems to enjoy terrorizing him. Does Leon have a choice? Is it possible to argue that he isn't simply a bad guy caught red-handed, but more akin to a child left with no option but to violently defend himself? I think it is, but let's look a little further before we go in that direction. If we back up to the movie's opening text, the same paragraph that tells us replicants were used off-world as slave labor, it explicitly states that replicants are illegal on Earth, and Blade Runners have shoot-to-kill orders upon detection of any trespassing replicant. I'll take a moment here and acknowledge that Deckard doesn't always follow those orders. He not only allows Rachel to live, he helps her escape. But is Deckard even a real Blade Runner? From the start, he adamantly refuses to take the job of hunting down the replicants. He tells Bryant, "I was quit when I come in here, Bryant. I'm twice as quit now." He only agrees to do the job because Bryant threatens him. You know the score, pal. If you're not cop, you're little people. Deckard's hesitance to pick up the Blade Runner mantle isn't just because it's dangerous, it's also traumatic. After shooting Zora in the back, he stands over her body, stunned with shock, and the first thing he does afterwards is buy a bottle of booze so he can go get drunk. He may have acquiesced to Bryant's extortion and agreed to carry the B designation on his badge, but he still hates what he's doing. Contrast all of this with Holden's cocky, almost sadistic demeanor as he toys with Leon in the Tyrell headquarters. The man's behavior transforms from dismissive to exultant when he realizes he's got his replicant. Holden would definitely have retired Leon once the Voight-Kampff machine confirmed that he was not human. So yes, Leon had every reason to fear for his life, and no choice but to fight or die. But there's more to this situation than just a boy defending himself against a cop with an itchy trigger finger. If we keep digging, could we find evidence that Leon is actually one of the good guys? Consider this. After Bryant briefs Deckard, the Blade Runner takes his spinner to the Tyrell Pyramid to see a new replicant up close and verify that the Voight-Kampff machine is still able to detect the new models. This is where we meet Tyrell himself, who asks Deckard to run the Voight-Kampff on a human so he can see what a negative result looks like. He offers his assistant Rachel as a subject. After a montage of extremely provocative questions, Deckard shuts down the machine. He has trouble looking Rachel in the eye, and Tyrell dismisses her. Deckard says, "She's a replicant, isn't she?" Tyrell asks how many questions it usually takes to identify a replicant, to which Deckard responds 20 or 30, but it took more than 100 for Rachel. Deckard realizes that she doesn't know she's a replicant, and he asks, how can it not know what it is? Tyrell dodges the question, but he can't resist bragging about what he's accomplished, revealing crucial information that radically shifts the roles of Deckard and the replicants he's hunting. Commerce is our goal here at Tyrell. More human than human is our motto. Rachel is an experiment, nothing more. We began to recognize in them a strange obsession. After all, they're emotionally inexperienced, with only a few years in which to store up the experiences you and I take for granted. If we gift them the past, we create a cushion or pillow for their emotions, and consequently, we can control them better. Tyrell makes it painfully clear that he wholeheartedly embraces his motto, more human than human, yet also believes Rachel, a model so advanced that even she doesn't know she's a replicant, is nothing more than an experiment. His replicants are merely a product, something to be controlled. There's a word for this: slaves. But the slavery idea isn't much of a revelation since, as I mentioned, the opening text specifically says the replicants are used for off-world slave labor. However, here we have their creator, the man who has gone out of his way to engineer artificial humans who are better than the real thing, building in methods of control, and then selling them. And remember, none of them are over 4 years old. This guy is selling children into slavery. This guy is the villain. So if Tyrell is the villain, what does that make the replicants? Are they the protagonists? In the big picture, the larger story that we're not being explicitly told in this movie, I think so. And considering that Roy is the leader of the group, it isn't a stretch to say he's the hero of that story. He's the character who broke the bonds of slavery and led a group of replicants seeking a way to extend their lifespans. None of them started out looking to take down the corporation or dethrone the villain, but as the hero cycle so often goes, Roy finds himself face to face with that villain, and he destroys him. This is the real conflict, the real story. Deckard is just a side character. Imagine if a TIE fighter pilot told the story of Star Wars: A New Hope, or a Wayland-Yutani executive told the story of Aliens. We would get a totally different picture, one that missed a lot of the plot leading up to the point where that character comes in, and perhaps the story would present a completely different view of who is the good guy. This is how Blade Runner works. A side character with only a peripheral view of the whole picture gives us part of that story, and we have to figure out the rest from the details he gives us. Which brings us back to Leon. He's a child who chose to follow the boy who freed him from slavery on a quest for the chance to live more than 4 years. He bravely plays his part in the plan, pretends to be human, the very people who enslaved him, so he can find a way into the villain's lair, and he gets caught. He doesn't have a choice. He knows the humans will kill him if he doesn't get out, so he fights back. After he incapacitates Holden, whether by choice or chance he doesn't kill the Blade Runner, he runs. From there, he shadows Roy as they seek a new way to reach Tyrell, not to kill him, but to ask for more life. Along the way, he's an intimidating presence, but perhaps he's picked this up from his run-in with Holden. Yes, he does try to kill Deckard, but he witnessed the Blade Runner shooting his friend in the back, and while his actions aren't really what you'd call heroic, his fury and desire for vengeance are certainly understandable human emotions. So where does all this lead me? While I don't think Leon is the hero in this tale, I also can't see him as the villain, and I can definitely sympathize with him. Thanks for listening to my ideas about Leon. What do you think about the characters in Blade Runner? So this format is a little unusual for me, but if you'd like to see more video essays, let me know what you'd be interested in discussing. While I've got your attention, I would love to be able to open up the community portion of this channel where we can have a more immediate interaction, but YouTube says I need 1,000 subscribers. That seems really huge to me, but I think we can do it, so let's make that a goal. Remember guys, your question could be the next video, so let me know what's on your mind, and I will see you next time.